Hello, and in today's lecture we're going to look at how do we answer a 30-mark question for AQA A-level history, those pesky 30-mark extract questions. So in the exam you're going to be presented with 3 extracts about a particular topic. You're going to be given a question. You have 1 hour in which to answer it. I would highly recommend that you spend at least 15 minutes planning your answers, and we'll show today how a good plan will lead to a great answer. We're going to look at AQA's advice to begin with. Students may respond to each extract in turn or adopt an integrated approach. We're going to be planning a systematic approach, so we respond to each extract in turn. So extract 1, extract 2, extract 3. Students are not required to compare assessments. You do not have to say that one extract is stronger than the others, as you would have to do in the AS. Thirdly, students will be required to identify key arguments and evaluate them, and we're going to talk about how to use contexts and content in order to analyse. Lastly, AQA says, similarly, to argue from the basis of omission, what is not said must be secondary to the assessment. And we're going to look at the essays today and how we have started to say this extract does not use this information and this extract does not use this information, but it's very much secondary to what is being said. Last point that is very important: no introduction or conclusion is necessary. Some of the specimen papers specimen answers do have introductions and conclusions, and AQA do say that they add to the overall effect of the answer, but you're not going to be gaining marks, and you're certainly not going to be losing marks if you do not include them. So our plan will not have them. We're going to look straight away at the mark scheme. So this is the summarised rubric for this question. The question is, using your understanding of the historical context, assess how convincing the arguments in extract 1, 2 and 3 are in relation to the cycle of boom, bust and recovery in the American economy during the interwar years. So the crux of this question is we are assessing how convincing the arguments are in each extract. So we'll be looking at the arguments and how convincing they are. Now the rubric says to get 25 to 30 we've got to demonstrate excellent understanding of the interpretations, effective analysis using context to support and evaluate. We're going to talk about convincing evaluation and very good understanding of the historical context. So the first thing I would do when planning my answer, I wouldn't even read the sources straight away, the extracts. What I would do is take the second half of the question in relation to the cycle of boom, bust and recovery in the interwar years, and I would write down everything that I can remember about the topic, and I'm going to be looking for this piece of information in the extracts themselves. So on one hand we've got the boom period, the roaring 20s, GDP growth, low unemployment, 30% wage rises, easy credit, the bull market, etc, etc. And on the other hand, the negatives of this period, the bust, agriculture, decline of traditional industries, shipbuilding, etc. We've got the instability of finance, the lack of government reaction onwards, and that will be the information that we're going to be using in context. Then we come on to the extracts. Now I'm not going to read them, you can read them yourselves, but this will be what you'll be presented with, 3 extracts, and they'll be blank. Now what you need to do is pick out the key arguments for each of these. So I'd highlight or underline the key arguments, which should look like this. So the key arguments of extract 1 really is that there was a post-war recession in 21, and then there was healthy recovery in the 20s. And some key points: American workers produced more goods efficiently, incomes increased, and greater productivity. Now interesting points here is when more Americans could afford luxury goods, at least materially, they led materially better lives than before. And the end sentence: by the end of the decade, most Americans were living lives well furnished with debt. So a summary of this source would be that the 1920s was a positive experience after the recession in 21, that American lives got better for the majority, and that there was levels of debt. So I've started now to annotate around the sources. I haven't even looked at extract 2 or 3 yet. I'm annotating with my own knowledge. Can I support the assertions and the arguments made by Eric Wartray in extract 1? So where he says goods more efficiently, mechanisation, Henry Ford would be a good example to use there. Post-war recession, well, I know that the GDP increased by 2% per annum on average from 1922, and unemployment never went about 4%. And you can see I'm trying to support as much of the information as I can with my own historical context. The pieces in red, mechanisation took away 2 million jobs, etc., that's information that I can criticise and I can deepen my evaluation of each of the points. You'll notice though I am trying to include more support than I am criticism. Just like AQA have asked for, what's not said, the omissions, are secondary to what is being said. Now, extract 2, you can do the same again. You can read through extract 2, pause the video if you so wish, and you can have a go at highlighting the arguments yourself. What do you think extract 2's argument is? What is Howard Zinn arguing about boom, bust and recovery in this period? For me, he is arguing that the Wall Street crash that happened in 1929 was directly the result of speculation, and that John Galbraith said in his study that the economy was fundamentally unsound. Howard Zinn then goes on to say a socialist critic would go further to say that it was unsound by nature. So to summarise, the 1929 Wall Street crash was down to wild speculation, but there was a much more fundamentally unsound nature to its economy, and we can support this with information that we know. We can say that there was a decline in the traditional industries in this period, the shipbuilding, etc., and we can say that there was wild speculation from 1927 when easy credit was available, and we're going to look at how we can use those in our answers. The last sentence, 1929, the system was a sick and undependable system, and we can certainly criticise and support some of the information in this. So again, we're going to use our information to support it. Inadequate regulation in the 1920s. You've got the presidencies of Harding and Coolidge, and their hiree Mellon that runs the economy is responsible for the fundamentally unsound. The gold standard plays a part in this. And the last part, well, by the 1930s, the average industrial stock market prices were back to levels before the crash. So how can it be a sick and undependable system? Now, the third extract by John Kenneth Galbraith in 1979 is a different perspective of this period. So again, sharp speculation in farm commodities and real estate. There was the boom from 1919, the golden years. Then came the crash of 1920 and 21. Galbraith is heavily critical of the Federal Reserve and the federal government. They were reacting to the situation that was occurring rather than being proactive. They then made a decision in 1927 to loan money. He calls it easing credit, and this helps the stock market boom and then makes the crash of 1929 even more so. And in the last part, the Federal Reserve was indifferent to their fate, the number of banks that closed, and we'll be talking about how we use that in our answer. So these are just notes that I've been writing around. So annotated commodities and real estate. Yeah, well, I know that there was a shift away from rural areas, and that the rural workers, the agricultural workers, were suffering, and there was a much more focus on consumerism and the middle class. That was the 1920s boom period in the urban areas. We've got the impact of World War I that led to the golden age for farmers. And then taking the last point that he uses, the Federal Reserve was indifferent to their fate. Well, we've got criticism. We could say, well, actually, no, Hoover did do something. It was too little too late, but he did attempt with the National Credit Corps, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932, the Glass-Steagall Act, and then we've got the New Deal policies, etc. Now, whether we use all of this information remains to be seen. So I've now spent the first 15 minutes of my time annotating the sources to the nth degree to make sure that I am in a position to write my answer. Now, the next stage, I would write a very quick summary of each of the extracts. Do I know what their argument is? So you can see on this slide that I've summarised the interpretation's argument, and I've put a note in bold where I think what I think the arguments are and how convincing they might be. So this now goes towards my plan. I can deal with each of these in turn, and I can really flesh out the answers to make sure that I've got the best 30-mark answer that I can possibly have. Now, it is difficult to get a very effective writing frame for this, so I would always start with my judgment. I'd use quotes, I'd support that with contextual knowledge, I'd use supporting information, contrasting information, and then I'd round back off my sentence with a judgment. Now, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this. We might use PCAN, point evidence contextual analysis, and we may try and think of something that's a little bit more catchier than that. So now our answer, and I'm going to show you each of the paragraphs. I'll tell you how I've constructed them, and then I'll let you delve deeper by pausing the video at different points to see how my answer has come about. So the very first couple of paragraphs will be dedicated to extract 1, then extract 2, then extract 3. And you can see my writing style trying to come in. So starts by making the judgment. Extract 1 offers a balanced view, if somewhat optimistic view of the interwar period of boom, bust and recovery. It's therefore fairly convincing. So I've nailed my judgment in my very first opening sentence, and my argument from this point onward needs to support it. So I've broken it into judgment, supporting information, supporting contextual information, contrasting contextual information, and then a judgment at the end as well. To highlight this even further, we've gone on to colour code it. So you can see my judgment takes up the first few sentences. I've then used a quote that I can then analyse a little bit more deeper. And you see in green that I'm using supporting information, and that's all my own knowledge that I've made in notes from the previous part, trying to say whether the author is convincing in his argument or whether he isn't. And in red, you can see my contrasting information. So I've said the author does accept that it was not entirely positive, but concluded that by the end of the decade, Americans were living materially better lives. Now, they were living materially better lives, so long as you were middle class or an urban worker. If you were somebody in the rural area, or somebody who had lost their jobs due to mechanization, then you were going to be suffering, as we know. And I've said that this was symptomatic of the decline of traditional economies. So the author of Extract 1 fails to take into consideration the impact on agriculture. You see in the second paragraph, I've gone a little bit further. I've used, again, a quote. I've then delved into it and analysed it with supporting context. You can see I'm very heavy on contextual information. Our answer now for Extract 2. And in the same way, I've annotated it for you. So you can see in green, the supporting contextual information, in red the contrasting information, and in purple the judgments. And you see I'm trying to round off each of my paragraphs with a judgment to how convincing is the extract. You can see my conclusions at the end. Therefore, while this is an overly negative view of the period, it is a convincing interpretation of the 1920s. Consequently, the assessment offered by Extract 2 is convincing, and I'm hammering it home. You see I repeat that word, convincing, 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 and that's because it's the crux of the question. It's asking you to analyse the sources. I've analysed the sources, I've supported it with contextual information, I've offered contrasting information or contradicting information, or what's omitted, and then I've made a judgment. And in the last one, you see again the same kind of structure with judgments to start with, supporting information. I've even included a mini judgment that you could do, and then again supporting information, contrasting information, and judgments. And when that goes towards the whole answer, you can see that my essay is significantly more in supporting information than it is in contrasting information. And we take the point by AQA literally that omission should be secondary. And I think just this visual image shows you clearly that the contrasting information, the omission, is secondary to what is supporting my information. Lastly, we go back to the mark scheme, and I think we have demonstrated a very good understanding of the interpretations in all of the extracts, and it combines it with a strong awareness of the historical context. We have analysed, we have evaluated effectively, and we have said the evaluation of the arguments will be well supported and convincing. The response demonstrates a very good understanding of context, and I don't think you could argue any other way for that answer that we've just given. What I would say, if you're running out of time and it's approaching the hour mark and you've got maybe 10 minutes left and you've just on to Extract 2, make sure you finish all 3 extracts. They are very clear that they want you to analyse all 3. You can get mark band 4 if it is slightly weighted towards Extract 1 and 2 and that you've run out of time. You cannot access mark band 4 and 5 if you have not done all 3 extracts. It's why the integrated approach may be effective, and we'll be doing a lecture series on integrated analysis later on. Thank you very much.